Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dual Credit Biology 1, Unit 1, Lecture 1. This lecture is going to cover Chapter 1, Sections 1.1 through 1.3. You are going to need the following things. You're going to need some paper to jot down notes. You are going to need your copy of the Andromeda strain, which can be found in the Google Classroom. You can just pull it up. The only problem is it was rotated, so you may have to rotate it around. You may want to pull up the lecture presentation. This is on the Google Classroom as well. And then you're going to want to have your textbook so that you can glance at it as we go. So I'm going to let you pause for just a minute, gather up the Andromeda strain, your presentation, and your textbook. You may want to leave your Google Classroom available to you so that you can click on a couple of links that we're going to be looking at later. So if you will, just pause right now and go find those items. Okay, so we're going to get started with Chapter 1. Let me pull up my PowerPoint for you so it'll just kind of keep me on task. So this is what our PowerPoint looks like for this particular unit. So let me pull that up for us. So this is just what we call the invitation to biology. It's what we're going to be looking at for the next just couple of days. It's a brief overview of biology, and it kind of helps us to set the stage for the chapters that are coming, okay? So the very first thing is I always like to look at what our core concepts are. These are the things that when we finish the chapter, you should have a better understanding of. So one is systems, that systems are complex properties and they interact, and those properties that interact create the system that depends upon one another. We are going to look at evolution and how evolution is responsible for the unity and the diversity that we see in life. Evolution is just change. So we'll be talking about that a little bit. And then we're going to be looking at the process of science. So we're going to do some scientific method stuff, which is pretty much, standard in every science class that you ever take, okay? So these are our chapter core concepts. They're actually in your textbook on page 3. They have them listed for you there. So we're going to start with section 1. I have a video that kind of covers section 1 that talks a little bit about how we find new species. And this is a very interesting video that talks about the discovery of some new species just recently. Our Earth is so vast and so diverse. There are so many things that we don't even know what they are because we've never discovered them. And so I'm not going to play the video in class because that would just be a waste of our recording time. But these videos are all linked in the Google Classroom. And so you can go and click on the link, you can watch this video, and it'll help you to better understand section 1.1. Okay, so let's move on to what biology is. I know that you've already learned this when you took Biology 1, but it's the scientific study of life. And we have realized that with biology, the more that we discover, the more we have yet to learn. And right now is a perfect example of this with the whole discovery of this new strain of the coronavirus. Coronavirus has been around since the beginning of time, more than likely. We've seen coronavirus. SARS is a coronavirus. There's others that are coronaviruses that you've heard of, but COVID-19 is a novel coronavirus, which means it's brand new. We don't know a lot about it. And I know right now there's so many conflicting viewpoints about how to treat the virus, what we need to do to prevent the spread of the virus. But we have learned that every time we learn something new, it changes. And I know that frustrates people because they're like, I can't get a clear understanding of what I need to do. You are living in a science experiment right now, which is what's so remarkable about the time that we're in at this moment. You are living in science. You're used to pulling up a scientific report, a scientific experiment, reading what happened, seeing clear-cut data, seeing a clear-cut conclusion, which is fantastic because it's very frustrating when you're actually having to do the science yourself. So we have learned the more we find out, the more that we discover, the more that we have to go and learn so that we can understand what we just discovered. So biology is not a stagnant. It is not a stationary type science. It is not concrete. biology changes. There are some things that we know to be true, but they change from time to time, so we can't even put them into law. And so, in chemistry and physical science, you learn a lot about laws, but there's not as many laws in biology because we're constantly making new discoveries. It is a very fluid science because new things are being found each and every day. So, I want to talk a little bit about how we put things together. And there's a very important concept that goes with biology, and it is called an emergent property. When I was younger, there was a fad, and every now and then you'll see them again, but there was a fad. It was called the magic eye posters. And I can remember the first time that I ever saw a magic eye poster. I was in a mall in Jackson, Mississippi, and I was a teenager, and I think I was there on a trip with the band in high school. And in the mall, I think we were at North Park, maybe. I don't even know if that's still there. They had these little kiosks in the middle of the mall, and one of those kiosks sold these posters. And when you looked at the poster, it was kind of like just a very consistent print. It may be like little fish all the way across, same color, same size, and everything. But what was happening was when they were put together, it would actually produce a 3D image. And I can remember sitting there looking at one of these posters, and these people around me are like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool," because this image was leaping out of the page at them, and I'm like, I don't see anything, and I'm thinking people are making fun of me. Like, maybe this is one of those hoaxes that you see on TV, like pranked or, bloopers or something like that. Well, eventually the person that was working that kiosk came over and explained to me how to go about seeing it. And then once you see it, it was always there. But what it was you had to look at the whole thing, but yet still focus on a specific part. And then this picture would emerge from that particular conglomeration. Well, science kind of works a little bit on the opposite because instead of focusing on the individual, you focus on the big. And what happens is as you begin to focus and more things come into play, you begin to get this big picture. Like, for instance, DNA is a good example. DNA is a really cool molecule. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But you don't understand what DNA does until you look at the big picture. And so things emerge as you move up the different levels of organization. Once again, I have a video clip here that you can go and watch. It's tagged in the or linked in the Google Classroom. It's also linked on the website. Go check it out because this explains how these emergent properties work. Now, these are our levels of biological organization. As you can see, it starts at the very smallest and it moves all the way. There we go. So biosphere is the largest, and then in between there, you begin to see these different organizations begin to unite until they eventually form the biosphere. So, like for instance, at the very smallest, you have the atom. And then the atom, you put those together, you create a molecule. And then the molecules together can form an organelle. Then those, if you get enough organelles that are working for the same purpose, you form a cell. And if you get enough cells that are working together doing the same function, that's a tissue. And then if you get enough tissues doing a particular function, then you form an organ, and so on and so forth, until eventually you get to the largest, which would be the biosphere. So if you think about it, everything in the biosphere that helps to form that biosphere, it is made up of atoms and molecules. Cells are where life forms. So that's why we always call it the smallest unit of life. But atoms are the smallest unit of matter. Okay? So I hope that makes sense to you. That is section 1.2. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about life. Okay? Now, if you have not done it yet, I need you to pause the video and I need you to take a minute and I need you to read this excerpt from a book called The Andromeda Strain. And just so you know, it is an old book. It was written back in 1969. This book is written by Michael Crichton, and some of you might have no idea who that is until I say this. Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton wrote the books Jurassic World and The Lost World. he wrote those books. So he's a fantastic author, very exciting author, and he usually has a very strong science theme throughout his writings. And this is one of them. And so I took this from the book. I copied it for you. It's on pages 200 to 202 in the book. And like I said, it was written in 1969. I want you just to pause your video if you've not read it yet and take a second and read this particular excerpt. Okay, so after you've read this, you will see that this whole discussion is about something being alive. Okay, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it because you're fixing to do a virtual discussion and you'll be working on it there, but everything is about being alive. I always like to, right now with my students, to take a minute and discuss what makes things living. Okay, so I have this candle, and just a little plug here. This candle was purchased from Leah Willingham. She has a candle company. So if you're looking for a really good smelling candle, this was Gain, and it's delicious. And I've already actually burned it out. I had to put a tea light in there. But anyway, but you can see I have a flame burning inside that little candle. Okay, so when we talk about something being alive, you typically talk about if it moves, if it breathes, if it eats, if it grows, things like that. So I always tell students to prove to me that this is not living, because a candle, a fire, it grows. If I take this fire and I take a piece of paper and stick it down in that jar, and that fire touches that paper, it's going to begin to consume that paper, which is an energy source, so that it can produce more energy. This flame moves. Fire is not stationary, it moves. It flips and flickers and moves. People always say, well, it doesn't breathe. Fire does breathe. If I take this jar and put this lid on it and screw it down, that flame burns out. And so right there, that tells me that it does breathe. It has to have oxygen, just like we do. It has to have oxygen. So I like to use this time for us to take this excerpt from the Andromeda strain and this little demo of the candle and talk about living things, okay? In your Google Classroom, you are going to see a link called Is It Alive? Okay? And when you click that link, it is going to pull up something called a Padlet. And I love Padlet. It's a really cool tool for us to do virtual discussions. Normally, if we were doing this face-to-face and we weren't worried about social distancing, I would have chart paper up around the room and you would go around very quietly and write down your thoughts. But we're going to do this virtually. So what you're going to do is I have posed 4 questions. They are based off of just your thoughts. They are based off of the Andromeda strain. They are based off of what your thoughts about the Andromeda strain and then about the fire. And what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to go to this link and you're going to type in your responses to this particular series of questions, okay? Then once you've done that, come back to the video. I'm going to explain a few of these things to you. And then at the end of this lecture, I want you to go back to the Padlet at the end of this unit and read what everybody else had to say, okay? So pause your video now and go answer the questions on the Padlet. The link is in the Google Classroom. Good job. Okay, so I hope everybody enjoyed that. I really like Padlet. I think that's a neat little activity that we can use. So let's kind of rein everybody in and talk about living things and give a good biological scientific standpoint. So I pulled this table. I'm not sure if this actual table is in your book. I don't think it is, but I found this and it was part of the Cengage family. And it's some key features of life, things that make a living thing a living thing. So if someone ever walks up to you and says, hey, I need you to prove to me that fire is not alive, this is how you would do it, okay? Number 1 is it doesn't have cells. fire doesn't have a living entity in it because it's not alive. And one of those reasons is because it doesn't have cells. You have to have one or more cells to be able to be considered living. Okay. Fire also does not have an ongoing input of energy and nutrients. Fire will use what's there, but once it's gone, it's gone. And so it doesn't have this ongoing energy nutrient cycle. Fire cannot maintain homeostasis, which means that it cannot respond to changes. It can't go, ooh, there's more wood over here. Let me, go that way. Or, oh, I'm burning too hot. Let me cool myself down. Fire can't do that. And so, since fire cannot do that, it cannot be considered living because it does not go through homeostasis. And then also, it has no DNA. And so, it can't pass on genetic material. So, therefore, it is not considered alive. Um, Remember that not all living things eat. They all require energy, they all require nutrients, but they don't necessarily eat. An individual who's in a coma obviously has to get nutrients to stay alive, but they don't wake up from their coma at breakfast, lunch, and supper to eat. They get nutrients through an IV. Plants don't consume, a cheeseburger or something like that. They respond to the light. They have to have light in order to make their nutrients. And then there's some that use chemistry. There's some that use nutrients from the water vents, things like that. So they require energy so that they can continue to live. But one big thing, though, that you do need to know when we talk about all these diverse living things, there's two major categories. We have producers, which produce their own food, and we have consumers, which consume their food. And obviously, we are consumers. We cannot make our own food. I do want to take a quick second and talk about energy transfers because that's a big component of living organisms, is that there is always a cycle of energy. We are dependent on producers. We are dependent on primary consumers because we take in those particular organisms in order for us to survive, and then our waste or our bodies are used to fuel the next producers by using decomposers. And so this is a constant cycle of energy and matter that we see, or flow of energy in a cycle of matter that we see in our ecosystems. So what you need to know or take away from this is that balance is needed for all living entities to survive and thrive. By sensing and adjusting to change, all organisms keep conditions in their internal environment within ranges, which is homeostasis. And that ability to maintain homeostasis is a key, denotes that it's living. Remember that all organisms pass on genetic material to their offspring. Um, just a real quick plug, one of the biggest pet peeves that I've heard throughout these last few months about COVID is killing the virus, killing the virus, killing the virus, killing the virus, killing the virus. You can't kill the virus because guess what? The virus is never alive. A virus is not a living entity. You can destroy the virus. You can break it up. Things like Clorox and Lysol and things like that do destroy the virus, but they don't kill the virus because they do not have DNA as their genetic material. They have an RNA as their genetic material. You have to have DNA to pass that along, and that's what is another thing that considers things to be living. Okay, so that kind of covers all of that. And so if you've not already done it, go back in and read sections 1.1 through 1.3. When I do these lectures and these notes, I don't go through every single tidbit. I don't even when I'm in the classroom because we just don't have time. This class, because it's a college level class, I am expecting you to kind of be a little bit more proactive in your own learning. And so if you would go in, if you've not read the first 3 sections, go ahead and do it. And then I would go ahead and read sections 1.4 and 1.5 in preparation for the next lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to email or text me, and I'll be glad to answer them for you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.